The Terran exploration probe Wayfinder 7, a sleek automated needle of chrome and sensors, tumbled silently through a nebula of incandescent gas far beyond charted space. Its mission: routine spectral analysis, looking for anomalies, for anything that hinted at intelligent life beyond the known federations. For months it had transmitted only predictable data: starbirths, gas giants, the occasional rogue asteroid. Then, Commander Aris Thorne, head of the Terran Federation's Deep Space Anomaly Division, received the ping. It wasn't just an anomaly, it was an impossibility. The Wayfinder 7 had detected a gravitational signature. Not of a black hole or a neutron star, but of something immense yet utterly empty. It was a region of space where all conventional mass readings flatlined, yet gravitational lensing indicated an object of astronomical scale. Thorne, a veteran of countless first contacts and strange phenomena, felt a prickle of unease. This defied the fundamental laws of physics. The data wasn't just contradictory, it was ontologically inconsistent. He brought the raw telemetry to Dr. Lena Petrova, the Federation's foremost xenolinguist and xenoarchaeologist. Petrova was known for her intuitive leaps, her ability to find patterns in chaos, and her unsettling talent for thinking like the alien. She stared at the holographic projections, her brow furrowed, a faint tremor in her hand as she traced the gravitational contours. "It's a void, Commander," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. A perfectly formed, gravitationally potent nothing. Her screens were awash with algorithms attempting to reconcile the data, each one failing, spitting out errors that bordered on philosophical paradox. Then, a second, more disturbing ping arrived. The Wayfinder 7 had not just detected the void, it had entered it. Its sensors, initially blank, had suddenly registered a structure. Not a ship, not a planet, but an architecture. The image that flickered onto Thorne's main display was a single, massive construct. It defied Euclidean geometry. Its lines shifted, curved, and intersected in ways that broke the human eye's ability to follow. A single wall appeared to be simultaneously concave and convex. A spire seemed to extend infinitely upwards, yet also folded back into its base. It wasn't merely strange. It was designed to be unperceivable in a coherent way. Petrova gasped, clutching her head. It's a non-Euclidean construct," she whispered, her voice tight with strain. "Designed to scramble perception, to deny coherence." The image lingered for only a moment before the Wayfinder 7's internal diagnostics screamed, "System corruption, critical," and the probe went silent, lost to the void. Thorne stared at the last transmitted image, his mind struggling to process the impossible angles. The impossible void! This wasn't just first contact. This was an encounter with something that actively fought against understanding. And for the first time, Aris Thorne felt a fear far deeper than any physical threat, the cold dread of cosmic absurdity. The loss of Wayfinder 7 sent shockwaves through the Terran Federation. But the data it transmitted, fragmented and maddening as it was, fueled a desperate scientific curiosity. Dr. Petrova, despite suffering from severe headaches and occasional bouts of spatial disorientation after viewing the initial data, became obsessed. She theorized that the missing probe wasn't destroyed by conventional means, but simply unraveled by the mere proximity to such an ontologically hostile environment. The architects, as she tentatively named the unknown civilization, weren't just alien, they were fundamentally anti-coherent. Her research team, a collection of brilliant but increasingly twitchy physicists, mathematicians, and xenolinguists, tried to make sense of the fragmented architectural data. They used advanced AI to reconstruct the non-Euclidean geometry, only for the AI to crash repeatedly, spewing out code errors that read like philosophical riddles about self-contradiction and the limits of form. One physicist developed a persistent tic in his eye after attempting to model a structure that appeared to be larger on the inside than the outside, yet simultaneously smaller. It was a slow, creeping psychological assault. Petrova focused on the subtle energy readings that accompanied the architectural schematics. She found that the structures emitted a unique, barely detectable field, a kind of anti-resonance that actively dissolved logical connections in the observer's mind. It didn't transmit information, it subtracted it. It created cognitive dissonance. "They're not communicating, Commander," Petrova explained to Thorne, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "They're uncommunicating. They're designing things to actively prevent understanding. Their very existence is an act of logical sabotage." Thorne, meanwhile, scoured the Federation's xenological archives for any mention of civilizations that defied conventional logic. He found only vague, dismissive references from elder races, who spoke of the unfathomable reaches, or the places where thought dies. The Cathar hegemony, known for their rigid adherence to ancestral logic, had simply cordoned off such sectors, declaring them unsafe for coherent thought. The Lumina, typically open to abstract concepts, described them as zones of silence where their complex light-pattern communication would simply flicker out, unable to form coherent meaning. It was a universal avoidance, a galactic shudder of fear from beings who had far more experience with the truly alien. Petrova, her eyes gleaming with a manic intensity, finally made a breakthrough. She realized the architect's language, when she eventually found fragments of it in their structure's subtle energy patterns, was not designed for communication, but for conceptual deconstruction. It wasn't about conveying meaning, but about erasing it. Their entire civilization, she theorized, was devoted to actively building a universe of anti-sense. "They are the inverse of everything, Commander," she whispered. "Where we build meaning, they build meaninglessness. Where we strive for order, they strive for ultimate chaos. Their ultimate goal is to make existence itself fundamentally incomprehensible." Thorne stared at the swirling, impossible geometry on the screen, then at Petrova, whose eyes held a flicker of something dangerously close to understanding. He realized this wasn't an alien enemy to be fought with guns, but a cosmic horror that threatened the very sanity of intelligent life. The Terran Federation now faced an enemy unlike any other, not just technologically superior, but epistemologically hostile. How do you prepare for war against a civilization whose weapons were concepts, whose architecture was madness, and whose goal was universal incomprehensibility? Military strategists found themselves grappling with paradoxes. Tactical simulations crashed when confronted with non-Euclidean battlefields. AI analysis loops went into recursive error states when asked to predict the movements of ships that could be in two places at once. The very act of thinking about the architects was a weapon against human coherence. Commander Thorne established Project Oracle, a top-secret initiative to find a way to interact with, and perhaps even understand, the architects of anti-sense without succumbing to their mind-breaking influence. Dr. Petrova, despite the growing psychological toll, was its head. Her team expanded to include individuals with unique cognitive abilities. A savant who could hold contradictory thoughts simultaneously without mental strain, an artist who could perceive and render impossible geometries, and a philosopher who specialized in paradoxes. These were the anomalies, the humans whose minds naturally bent where others broke. Their initial strategy, the contradiction protocol, was born from Petrova's chilling insight. If the architects thrived on anti-sense, perhaps humanity could adapt by learning to embrace it. They began to study the architect's language of deconstruction, not to understand it, but to find its inherent rules, its logical structure within its absurdity. It was like learning the grammar of nonsense. They developed specialized cognitive training regimens designed to enhance the human mind's ability to hold contradictory concepts without immediately collapsing into madness. It was deeply disturbing work, pushing the limits of human cognition, risking the very sanity of the participants. Some broke, retreating into catatonia, their minds unable to reconcile the fundamental absurdities. One such successful anomaly was a young linguistic genius named Jax. He could internalize fragments of the architect's anti-language without suffering immediate mental breakdown. He described it as a constant, low-level buzz of internal logical inconsistencies, but something his mind could compartmentalize. Jax claimed the architect's language wasn't meant to be spoken, but to be felt. an active conceptual field that reshaped the observer's reality. "They're not just building structures, Commander," Jax explained, his eyes distant. "They're building ontological environments. They're trying to turn the universe into an active paradox. And we, with our desire for sense, are the biggest anomaly." Thorne watched the holographic displays, seeing the flickering, impossible geometries of the architect's ever-expanding structures. They were growing, slowly consuming sectors of space, turning them into zones of active, mind-bending absurdity. And humanity's best hope was to teach themselves to think like madmen, to find a pattern in chaos, to embrace the contradiction. It was a terrifying, profoundly unhuman approach. Yet it was the only one that offered a faint glimmer of survival against a horror that fed on coherence. The contradiction protocol began to yield disturbing yet promising results. Humans, with their unique cognitive plasticity and their stubborn refusal to accept impossible, were slowly developing an unprecedented tolerance for absurdity. They weren't going mad. They were, in a terrifying way, adapting. The savant on Petrova's team, who could naturally hold contradictions, discovered a pattern of non-pattern in the architect's constantly shifting geometric constructions, allowing them to predict a momentary, fleeting window of quasi-coherence in the structures. The artist could render impossible vistas without going insane, creating visual representations that, while unsettling, held a strange internal consistency. The philosopher began to develop a meta-logic, a framework for understanding paradoxes not as failures of reason, but as inherent features of a universe the architects were actively sculpting. This was humanity's unique strength, not in fighting the absurdity, but in its profound, almost irrational ability to find meaning in meaninglessness, to create a narrative even when no coherent one existed. Other species would break or simply avoid. Humans tried to understand even when understanding meant warping their own minds. They were becoming, in a strange and terrifying way, the architect's most resistant and unpredictable anomaly. Commander Thorne, though deeply concerned by the psychological changes in Project Oracle personnel, recognized the necessity. He authorized the construction of the Mobius, a new class of Terran exploration vessel specifically designed to navigate the architect's ontological environments. The Mobius incorporated experimental cognitive dampeners and perceptual filters that would allow its crew to experience reduced, modulated levels of the architect's anti-resonance, protecting them from immediate mental collapse while still allowing them to process the impossible information. The ship itself was built with adaptive hull plating that could subtly reconfigure itself to avoid structural resonance with non-Euclidean spaces, preventing its own unraveling. The elder races, observing humanity's increasingly strange activity in the unfathomable reaches, reacted with a mixture of bewilderment and profound unease. The Cathar, with their rigid logic, simply couldn't comprehend how the Terrans were even surviving in those regions, let alone building new vessels to explore them. Ambassador Xylor, during a tense interstellar council meeting, expressed a chilling observation. "The Terrans, they are becoming something new," he rasped. "They are learning to dance with the illogical, to embrace the chaos. It is disturbing." Thorne knew Xylor was right. Humanity was changing. They were developing a terrifying new form of cosmic resilience. They were teaching themselves to navigate the geometry of madness, to find a logic within the unthinkable, to adapt to an enemy that fought with anti-sense. They were becoming the very thing the architects struggled to comprehend, a species that, when faced with an existential threat designed to break their minds, simply learned to break the rules of their own minds to survive. They were no longer just observers. They were active participants, shaping themselves to fight in a war for the very nature of reality itself. The Mobius was unlike any vessel humanity had ever constructed. Its exterior, a seamless, matte black composite, shimmered subtly as its adaptive hull plating anticipated and countered localized spatial distortions. Its interior was a marvel of human ingenuity and psychological engineering, designed to offer as much mental stability as possible against the onslaught of anti-sense. Walls were plain, colors muted, and a constant low-frequency hum permeated the decks, a subconscious counter-resonance against the architect's conceptual fields. Commander Thorne, now captain of the Mobius, felt the pressure of command like a physical weight. His crew, the hand-picked anomalies from Project Oracle, were the tip of humanity's spear against the unthinkable. Dr. Petrova, serving as the Mobius's lead xenolinguist and ontological engineer, guided them deeper into the anti-fold, the region of space where the architect's influence was strongest, where reality began to fray at the seams. On the main view screen, the stars outside became distorted, their light bending at impossible angles, creating nebulae that swirled into self-contradictory patterns. Geometric structures vast beyond imagining began to emerge from the cosmic chaos. These were the architect's primordial constructions, massive ontological engines that actively sculpted reality. A towering spirescape might appear to be simultaneously receding and approaching, its surfaces textured with patterns that seemed to change as soon as they were observed. The Mobius's experimental cognitive dampeners hummed, translating the architect's direct conceptual fields into a manageable, albeit unsettling, sensory input. Jax, the linguistic prodigy, now serving as the ship's conceptual navigator, sat hunched over a console, his brow furrowed in concentration. He described the antifold as a constant static of impossibility, a psychic interference designed to short-circuit coherent thought. "They're not just building structures, Commander," Jax reported, his voice tight. "They're building arguments. Every angle, every line, every impossible intersection is a logical proposition designed to break us. It's an active conceptual assault." The crew, despite the dampeners, experienced constant, low-level cognitive dissonance. Crew members reported momentary lapses in memory, perceiving time running backward for a split second, or finding themselves unable to grasp simple concepts like up or down for brief periods. The ship's AI, designed to handle complex logical operations, occasionally stuttered, presenting solutions to problems that were perfectly logical yet utterly absurd. Thorne himself found it increasingly difficult to hold a linear thought, his mind constantly trying to reconcile the impossible vistas outside with the rigid logic of his command. He relied on Petrova and Jax, whose minds, already adapted to contradiction, seemed to operate in this madness with a terrifying alien grace. They were stepping into the heart of cosmic absurdity, and the cost to their human minds was already immense. As the Mobius ventured deeper into the anti-fold, the architect's constructions grew in density and complexity. They weren't just isolated structures. They formed sprawling, interconnected megastructures, vast cities of anti-sense that spanned light years. These were the true domains of the architects, where their language of deconstruction was etched onto the very fabric of space. Petrova's team discovered that the architects communicated not through conventional signals, but through direct ontological imprinting onto reality itself. Their words were spatial distortions, temporal paradoxes, and semantic voids. Jax, whose mind was uniquely attuned to these conceptual patterns, began to discern a terrifying grammar within the architect's constructs. He described it as a language of negation, where every positive statement implied its own contradiction, and every form dissolved into its inverse. "They're constantly writing," Jax explained to Thorne, his eyes wide with the unsettling insight. "The entire antifold is their grand pronouncement, and they're saying that meaning is a lie, that coherence is an illusion, that all forms must eventually unravel." The sheer scale of their philosophical declaration was staggering, designed to mentally crush any coherent observer. The Mobius encountered its first direct interaction with the architects. Not a physical attack, but a conceptual assault. A section of the ship's internal layout momentarily inverted, corridors leading to dead ends, a mess hall appearing in the engine room, then snapping back. Crew members briefly found themselves unable to identify common objects. A wrench became conceptually indistinguishable from a coffee mug. The cognitive dampeners strained, their energy output spiking as they fought to reassert coherent reality. One junior officer suffered a temporary semantic aphasia, unable to recall the meaning of any noun. Petrova, using the Mobius's advanced conceptual analysis suite, began to actively map the architect's anti-language. She realized that their communication wasn't meant for understanding, but for shaping. Every conceptual assault was an attempt to remold the Mobius's crew, to force them to adapt to the architect's reality, or simply to break. "They're building us into their universe, Commander," Petrova stated, her voice grim. "They're trying to reprogram our minds to accept their anti-sense as natural. This isn't just about territory. It's about ontological conversion." Thorne, despite the constant mental strain, grasped the chilling implication. The architects weren't just creating a universe for themselves. They were trying to convert all intelligent life into beings capable of existing within that absurd reality. The elder races, with their retreat into blandness and meaninglessness, had unknowingly begun this conversion themselves, making themselves conceptually uninteresting. But humanity, with its stubborn insistence on meaning, was an obstacle, a defiant knot in the architect's grand tapestry of anti-sense. The only way to survive was to learn to speak their unspeakable language, not to succumb to it, but to find a way to twist its own rules against itself. The Mobius's mission now had a critical objective beyond mere observation: locate the logic gate, a theoretical nexus of architects' activity that Petrova and Jax had identified within their anti-language mapping. It was not a physical gate, but a conceptual one, a focal point where the architect's ontological directives were most intensely broadcast, where the rules of anti-sense were most clearly defined. If they could reach it, they might be able to understand the architect's ultimate goal and perhaps even disrupt it. Navigating the anti-fold to find the logic gate was a nightmare of shifting reality. The Mobius was subjected to constant, escalating conceptual assaults. Entire sections of the ship would briefly lose their up or down, gravity becoming an arbitrary concept. Sensor readings became contradictory. A nearby asteroid belt might appear as a fleet of alien warships, then as a flock of cosmic birds, then as a philosophical treatise on nihilism. The crew fought a constant internal battle to maintain their own sanity, relying on meditation techniques, constant self-affirmations of coherent reality, and the powerful but draining cognitive dampeners. Jax, guided by his unique insight into the architect's language, became indispensable. He could perceive fleeting, logical pathways through the conceptual chaos, moments where the architect's own paradoxes briefly canceled each other out, creating temporary zones of relative coherence. He was navigating by intuition, by feel, by a form of anti-logic that defied conventional explanation. He often spoke in riddles, his eyes glazed over, describing pathways that were everywhere and nowhere, or past and future simultaneously. Thorne trusted him implicitly, for Jax's madness seemed to be their only guide through the greater madness. They finally arrived at the coordinates Jax had identified as the logic gate. It wasn't a structure, but a vast, swirling vortex of pure conceptual energy, radiating the architect's anti-resonance with devastating intensity. Within its depths, impossibly complex geometric patterns twisted and realigned at blinding speed, creating ephemeral, self-contradictory forms that defied all observation. It was the heart of the architect's domain, a place where all meaning was born only to be immediately unmade. The Mobius bucked under the strain. Alarms blared as the cognitive dampeners overloaded, the crew's minds barraged by raw, unfiltered anti-sense. Thorne, clenching his jaw, felt his own mind begin to fray, the meaning of his command, of his very existence, flickering in and out. Petrova, however, was in a strange state of exhilaration, her face pale but her eyes blazing. "This is it, Commander!" she shouted over the alarms, a terrifying laugh escaping her lips. "This is where they are born. This is their origin of anti-sense, their great untruth. And we are here! We are here!" At the very edge of the logic gate, the Mobius held steady, its experimental systems pushed to their breaking point. Petrova and Jax, amidst the overwhelming chaos, began to receive direct conceptual transmissions from the vortex, not images or sounds, but pure, unfiltered logical propositions that formed the architect's ultimate thesis. It was their foundational truth that all coherence is an arbitrary imposition and true reality is pure, unformed contradiction. Their goal was to dismantle all imposed meaning, to return the cosmos to its original unbound state of absurdity. This profound, terrifying insight struck Thorne with the force of a physical blow. The architects weren't malevolent in the human sense. They were philosophical extremists, cosmic purists, seeking to cleanse the universe of what they saw as artificial meaning. And humanity, with its innate drive to build narratives, to impose order, to find purpose, was the ultimate affront to their cosmic vision. Yet this very insight also gave Petrova a desperate, audacious idea. "Commander," she gasped, fighting through a wave of vertigo. "Their language, it has a flaw! It's perfectly designed for deconstruction, but it lacks the capacity for novelty, for genuine unpredicted paradox." She theorized that while the architects could create infinite self-contradictions, they did so within a predefined framework of anti-logic. They could not conceive of something truly new, something that defied even their rules of nonsense. This was the human paradox. Other species either adapted to the architect's rules or perished. Humans, in their desperate struggle for survival, had pushed their own minds past the breaking point, not just to understand the architect's anti-logic, but to implicitly challenge it. They had found ways to generate unpredictable meaning, to create paradoxes that even the architects, with their mastery of anti-sense, could not categorize or unravel. They had developed conceptual wildcards, thoughts, ideas, and narratives that were so uniquely human in their illogicality, their emotional depth, and their stubborn refusal to fit any predefined conceptual framework, that they became indigestible to the architect's Rostova. Recalling the words of the elder races, understood now. The architects wanted to mold all life into beings suitable for their absurd universe, but humanity was inherently unsuitable. Their minds were not just coherent. They were chaotically coherent, capable of holding simultaneously true and false ideas, of believing in impossible things, of creating meaning out of nothing. They were the unquantifiable variable, the ultimate anomaly that the architects, with all their mastery of anti-sense, could not factor into their grand equation of erasure. Humanity, the tiny, illogical speck in a cosmos of grand, absurd designs, was becoming the ultimate, unbreakable paradox. Huddled at the edge of the logic gate, the Mobius crew faced a choice: succumb to the architect's ontological conversion, or attempt a gambit so audacious, so profoundly human in its irrationality, that it might just work. Petrova and Jax, drawing on their deep, unsettling understanding of the architect's anti-language, proposed Operation Chimera. If the architects could not process true novelty, truly unpredictable paradoxes, then humanity would become the ultimate conceptual wild card. They would generate a wave of such chaotic, untamed meaning that it would overload the architect's systems, not by force but by sheer, unquantifiable absurdity. The plan was terrifying. It required channeling the raw, unfiltered cognitive dissonance of the entire Mobius crew, amplifying their individual conceptual wildcards, their personal illogical beliefs, their most nonsensical dreams, their most deeply held, contradictory convictions, and broadcasting them directly into the logic gate. It meant stripping away the protective dampeners, exposing their minds directly to the architect's anti-resonance, and then fighting fire with fire, or rather madness with an even greater, more unpredictable madness. It was a calculated risk that could easily result in universal catatonia. Commander Thorne, his face grim but resolute, looked at his crew. They were not hardened warriors in the traditional sense, but explorers of the mind, pioneers of perception. They understood the stakes. There was a quiet, desperate courage in their eyes, a stubborn refusal to be assimilated by an entity that sought to erase their very essence. "If we're to become madmen," Thorne stated, his voice steady despite the thrumming anti-resonance, "let us be human madmen. Let us be ourselves in all our glorious absurdity. The Mobius positioned itself directly facing the logic gate, its specialized conceptual amplifiers aimed like a weapon. Petrova and Jax sat at the central console, preparing the upload. Jax, his eyes almost glowing with the strain of navigating the anti-language, spoke the final instructions. "It's not about what we think, Commander. It's about how we feel, about what we insist is true, even when it isn't, about the stories we refuse to let go of." The air on the bridge crackled with an unnatural energy, as if reality itself was holding its breath. Humanity, the tiny, illogical speck in a cosmos of grand, absurd designs, was about to launch its ultimate gamble of absurdity. With a command from Thorne, the Mobius's conceptual dampeners disengaged. The architect's raw anti-resonance slammed into the crew's minds, a torrent of impossible forms, self-contradictory logic, and semantic voids. Commander Thorne felt his own identity flicker, his understanding of ship, duty, self, dissolve into a chaotic jumble. Panic clawed at the edges of his sanity, but he clung to a single, illogical anchor, the memory of his daughter's laugh, a sound that defied all logic, all reason, yet was profoundly, undeniably real to him. Petrova, her body racked by tremors, unleashed the untamed narrative. The conceptual amplifiers hummed, then roared, broadcasting a torrent of humanity's most illogical, emotionally resonant conceptual wildcards directly into the logic gate. It wasn't a coherent message. It was a conceptual maelstrom. The unwavering belief in luck, despite all statistical evidence. The insistence on love even when rationally destructive. The comfort found in a fictional story, knowing it isn't real. The profound meaning found in art, which has no practical purpose. The collective chaotic surge of human unreason. The architect's logic gate reacted violently. The swirling vortex of anti-sense bucked and rippled, its perfectly sculpted paradoxes suddenly encountering something far more potent, genuine, human-generated, unpredictable paradox. The architects, masters of infinite self-contradiction within their own framework, found themselves confronted by concepts that simply did not compute, narratives that refused to be deconstructed because they had no coherent logical starting point. It was like trying to mathematically solve a poem or categorize a dream with a flowchart. Jax, his face a mask of strain, saw the architect's energy signatures falter. "They're trying to categorize it!" he screamed, his voice raw. "They're trying to find its anti-logic, but it doesn't fit. It's just noise to them, conceptual static." The architects, who fed on the systematic deconstruction of meaning, were now being force-fed a deluge of unquantifiable, undeconstructible, unlogical meaning. Their siphons of anti-sense, designed for precise erasure, were overwhelmed, choking on the raw, chaotic beauty of human irrationality. The very language of anti-sense that made them powerful was now their weakness, unable to parse the true, unpredictable chaos of the human mind. The cosmos resonated with the echo of unreason, and the architects could not silence it. The architects did not break. Entities of such immense cosmic scale and profound purpose do not simply shatter. But they did retreat, their logic gate, once a perfectly ordered vortex of conceptual deconstruction, became unstable, its geometric patterns flickering and losing their precision. The pervasive anti-resonance that permeated the anti-fold diminished, not vanishing entirely, but receding like a tide. The architects, unable to process the onslaught of human conceptual wildcards, chose to withdraw, to disengage from a form of meaning that defied their very operating principles. The Mobius crew, battered and mentally exhausted but profoundly sane, watched as the architect's vast, non-Euclidean constructions subtly shifted, growing more distant, less oppressive. The direct assaults on their minds ceased, replaced by a lingering, low-level buzz of background impossibility that their now strengthened cognitive resilience could manage. They had not defeated the architects in a conventional sense. They had simply made themselves too cognitively indigestible, too absurdly unquantifiable for the architects to bother with. They were the unstable boundary, the illogical firewall. The cost, however, was immense. The crew of the Mobius were profoundly changed. Jax, the conceptual navigator, now saw fleeting patterns of anti-sense in everyday objects, forever perceiving the universe through a doubled lens of coherence and contradiction. Petrova, the ontological engineer, understood the fragility of reality's perceived laws, her mind now capable of entertaining the possibility of infinite, absurd truths. Commander Thorne, while firmly anchored to his human identity, carried within him the chilling knowledge that the universe was not as fundamentally ordered as he once believed, and that sanity itself was a fiercely defended, often illogical construct. The elder races, having observed the unprecedented events from a safe distance, reacted with a mixture of terror and grudging respect. The Cathar, with their rigid adherence to logic, found the human victory deeply disturbing, a testament to an unstable, unpredictable form of intelligence they instinctively recoiled from. Ambassador Xylor, speaking to Thorne via secure channel, rasped, "You have survived, Terran, but at what cost? You have walked in the shadows of unreason. Are you still yourselves?" Thorne met his gaze, unblinking. "We are more ourselves than ever, Ambassador. We simply know our own minds better now. We know what we are capable of, even against the unthinkable." The truth was, humanity had been forged anew in the fire of cosmic absurdity. Humanity emerged from its encounter with the architects of anti-sense not as conquerors, but as profoundly altered beings. They had not fixed the universe, nor had they eradicated the threat. The architects still existed, retreating into the deeper void, continuing their grand project of ontological erasure in other, less noisy parts of the cosmos. But humanity had carved out a space for itself, a zone of creative conceptual chaos that the architects found too energetically costly to unravel. Project Oracle, now expanded and publicly funded, became a cornerstone of Terran Federation defense and exploration. It focused on cultivating and understanding humanity's unique cognitive resilience, its capacity for holding contradictions, for finding meaning in meaninglessness, for generating conceptual wildcards. Human art, philosophy, and even their most bizarre theories and dreams, once dismissed as mere cultural fluff, were now recognized as powerful conceptual assets. Humanity's very unoptimized nature, their chaotic, unpredictable, and stubbornly illogical minds, were their ultimate weapon. The Mobius, now legendary, continued its mission, exploring the fringes of the antifold, carefully mapping the architect's receding influence. Its crew, the anomalies who had learned to dance with madness, became the guardians of humanity's sanity, the navigators of the impossible. They taught others how to build their own internal cognitive barriers, how to embrace controlled conceptual dissonance, how to find anchors of meaning in a universe that occasionally tried to deny them. The elder races, in time, began to grudgingly seek humanity's counsel. They witnessed the Terrans not only surviving in regions they deemed unsafe for coherent thought, but actively thriving, building outposts where complex, vibrant human narratives flourished, seemingly impervious to the architect's influence. They saw humanity not as naive, but as terrifyingly resourceful. Some younger Cathar sought out human philosophers, trying to understand this logic of unreason. Luminous sages studied human art, marveling at its capacity to hold multiple, contradictory meanings simultaneously. Humanity had stared into the abyss of absolute absurdity, into the face of a cosmic horror that sought to strip all meaning from existence. And their response was not to retreat, not to surrender, but to defiantly, triumphantly assert their own unique, chaotic, and utterly illogical definition of self. They were the untamed minds, the paradoxical architects of their own, vibrantly illogical reality, forever defending the fragile yet unyielding fortress of human meaning against the encroaching night of anti-sense. They were the untamed narrative in a universe seeking to be erased, a constant, beautiful echo of unreason that would forever define them.